This is part 2 of chapter 2, from the point of view of Janelle. I completely rebuffed Cody's suggestion. I was shocked and laughed it off. After that, I didn't even give it a second thought. But when I returned to the office that afternoon, my coworkers were suspicious. They wanted to know who the cute man was who had taken me to lunch. I've heard that people in the office said I was glowing, but that seems a little exaggerated. A few months after Cody and Mary had moved to Montana, Cody told me they were going to be returning to his dad's ranch in Wyoming for the weekend, so I decided to visit as well. When I called my mother and told her I was going to be spending a few days with a polygamous family, she became alarmed. Unfortunately, many members of the LDS Church harbor a deep mistrust of polygamy. Mormons are taught from a young age that fundamentalism is backwards and sinful. I guess my mother was worried that I was going to be converted, swept away in some sort of cult, and never heard from again. Although it was clear that my mom didn't want me to go to Wyoming, she knew me well enough not to tell me not to do something. Had she tried to prevent me from visiting Cody and Mary, I would have left the moment I'd hung up the phone. That is also me. Ever since my mother divorced my stepfather, she had developed an independent and free spirit. She follows her own path at her own speed, so when I told her I was going to visit Mary and Cody, she told me that she was coming along for the weekend. Part of her wanted to meet a polygamous family and see what they were like, and part of her wanted to protect me from them. Well, let's just say that trip had an unexpected development. When Cody's father, Wynn, arrived and met my mother, they had an instant chemistry. Wynn already had 2 wives, but he and my mom began courting, and not long after our trip to Wyoming, they were married. When I returned to Utah, I began to explore the polygamous faith. There was something in the doctrines that intrigued me. All the men who had met in the faith had character. In addition to this, I discovered that women were amazingly strong. It became immediately apparent to me that when you choose to follow a countercultural path, you have to learn to be independent. In other words, when you choose an alternative lifestyle, one that is denigrated by the public, it develops your character. You either wash out or you stand up. Once I came to this conclusion, I started to believe that there was something for me in fundamentalism. As I was investigating the faith, I started studying the doctrines and principles of Mary and Cody's group, as well as talking to a lot of members of their church. I decided to pay another visit to Mary and Cody, who were now living in Montana. When I went up to Montana, I brought the man I was seeing at the time. Despite dating a member of the LDS faith, a conventional Mormon, I couldn't suppress my interest in fundamentalism. During that visit to Montana, it progressed from a curiosity to a calling. Now it's from the point of view of Cody. When Janelle showed up in Montana, she had a guy in tow. I knew she was hoping that a real relationship would develop between them, but I guess I was starting to wish for the opposite to happen. It may be ungenerous to say, but I hope their relationship would fizzle. When I saw Janelle and her boyfriend, I couldn't stop wondering why she was sabotaging herself. Don't get me wrong, the boyfriend was an awesome guy, but I had a sense that Janelle and I shared a destiny. The minute I met Janelle's date, I said to Mary, she's getting in her own way. She doesn't want to let herself have what she truly wants, so she's dating another guy. I'm not quite sure Mary understood what I was hinting at. I couldn't shake my spiritual awareness that Janelle and I would one day marry. I'm not sure exactly when this insight came to me. It wasn't born out of the same conventionally romantic attraction I had to Mary. It was a different feeling entirely, one that had more to do with spirituality and intellectual compatibility, romantic love. However, I couldn't help notice that in addition to her first-rate mind, I found her extremely attractive. Since I couldn't shake the awareness that would share a future, I was confounded by the fact that Janelle brought a date when she came to visit. I was certain that she was doing this to keep herself at a distance from me. In essence, I think she was testing both of our resolves. Now it's from the point of view of Janelle. When I left Montana, I was inspired but confused. I was attracted to the fundamentalist Mormon religion, and I was starting to think Cody might be the right person for me. For the first time, I allowed myself the luxury of admitting that I was interested in Cody. Not in the gushy romantic way, but because he was I can't read today. Or any day. Not because it was of the emblematic of all the things that attracted me to his faith, but still I was nervous. Converting to fundamentalism meant leaving my own faith. I needed time to think things through. I wanted to do some self-exploration. I was only 22, but already I'd been through a divorce. I wanted to get in touch with my own spirituality and my own ideals before making any major decisions. I wanted to travel, to get away from familiar surroundings. Part of me wanted to buy a Jeep, get a dog, and drive off to Colorado and live in the mountains. Another part wanted to explore my interest in the Native American way of life, something that has fascinated me since I was a little girl. I have always been involved with Native American culture on some level, whether through reading and studying or through collecting art and artifacts. Many of my friends were involved in the Mountain Men movement. They participated in reenactments of historical Mountain Men rendezvous, including spending time living in primitive housing, including teepees. They also practiced many of the crafts, such as furniture making and handiwork, typical of the early 1800s. I decided it would be a good idea to spend some time living closer to nature, as Native Americans once had. I bought a teepee and quit my job, intending to camp in my teepee for as long as I could bear it. Cody's father had lots of open space on his ranch and offered to let me camp on his land. By this time, he had married my mother. I knew that if I got too cold in the teepee, I could retreat to a warm house where my mother would be waiting. I got to Wyoming in November. Cold weather had settled in a while back, and the temperatures in Wyoming were biting and unbearable. Despite this, I was determined. It was below freezing when I got my camp set up. I didn't last a single night. It was so cold that after only a few hours, I was back in the house. I had quit my job in Utah, so I was free to travel up to Wyoming as much as I wanted. Cody's father is a patriarchal man, in the sense that he feels it is his duty and responsibility to look after his people in his family orbit. I was one of those people. He took me under his wing and made it clear that it was his intention to find me a guy. Wynn's plan was to convince me to settle on Cody's brother, but I had other ideas. When I was growing up, there was an incredibly cool father in my neighborhood. Perhaps because my stepfather was so distant, I took notice of how closely this man connected to his kids. He was a lawyer, but he would ditch work to take his children skiing. It seemed to me that every moment he was home, he was involved in some activity with one of his kids. It was clear that his children were the center of his world. I remember thinking how badly I wanted a dad like that. I'd seen the way Cody interacted with children. There were always kids around the ranch, and Mary's parents' house was often filled with them. I'd seen how loving Cody was and how much fun he could be. He even made time for kids not in his own family. He was energetic and caring, always willing to get down on all fours for any game the kids dreamed up. Cody seemed like exactly the father I had in mind for my kids. More than anything, I had fallen in love with the polygamous lifestyle. I loved the idea of sisterhood, the notion of companionship, and the possibility of a family that could grow in so many different ways. I saw so much potential in polygamy. Cody was an obvious choice for me, but not because of any conventional notion of romance. I have never ever been someone who's interested in sappy goo-goo eyes, chocolates, flowers, and sunset walks on the beach. The idea of cooing and cuddling doesn't agree with me. I'm sure there is a combination of things in my nature that makes me think this way. On the one hand, I've always been independent and happy to spend some time on my own and do my own thing. So I never felt the need to bind myself to someone on an intimate level. In addition to this, I think my early failed marriage disillusioned me somewhat, solidifying my notion of matrimony as something both pragmatic and practical. I wanted a strong husband who would be a wonderful father to my children. I always envisioned that I'd have a large number of children. I wanted a man with whom I'd have an intellectual connection with, who would be happy and willing to have long discussions with me. I wanted a companion, a friend, and if I found these things in a man, I was certain intimacy would develop from that. Even though Cody was quite young, he was the most emotionally intelligent man I knew. He was leap years ahead of all the other guys his age. He was the best guy I knew in the polygamous lifestyle I'd become infatuated with. So why wouldn't I want to marry the best guy out there? Go to part 3.